and I want to go back to when I was covering President Biden during the 2020 campaign. He hit some speed bumps throughout the course of that long, crowded Democratic primary race, and at every time when he faced some setbacks and there were questions about whether he could win the nomination, what we often saw from then candidate Biden was to raise the stakes of the election, to talk about the threat that 4 more years from Donald Trump would pose. At the time, he was trying to play into this idea that he was the most electable of the Democratic candidates. And so when he was facing setbacks, he would raise the stakes of the election by making it about Trump. We heard him use some of the strongest terms we've heard to date in terms of what Donald Trump and a second Trump term would mean for this country, ending his speech by saying we need to exile Donald Trump politically from this country, talking about that immunity decision from the Supreme Court as we hear the president come out one last time to tell this crowd that he won't forget this. That speaks to the emotion of this moment as well. But Yamiche, the other thing that I found so fascinating about this speech was not just what President Biden had to say about Donald Trump, his opponent in the general election, but what he signaled about his frustration with what we're hearing within the Democratic Party. You heard the president in a very defiant way talk about how voters across this country in Democratic primaries all across this country made him the nominee of the Democratic Party, and that he was not going to step away from this process. Also worth noting, though, that he made a point of praising his vice president and talking about the important role that she is playing in the party. So this is once again an important opportunity for the president. It wasn't a flawless speech. He did have an occasional misstep or two verbally, as we are going to focus on them intently going forward. The question now for Democrats is, who is standing in the way of the president of the party uniting to beat Donald Trump? Is it a wounded candidacy in Joe Biden, who's obviously made it clear he's going to continue to fight? Or is it those who are creating an unnecessary, in the view of his supporters, panic around his candidacy going forward that are what is hurting the party at this point?
And Mike, you bring up the idea of panic. There is a lot of chaos around the Biden campaign, and you bring up the fact that he did talk about supporting the vice president. He said he enjoyed and liked the fact that he was getting the support of the vice president. I know sources have told me that she is continuing to fiercely defend him, even as her loyal allies say, if he does step down, don't overlook her. But Aaron, take us through. You're at the White House. Talk to us a bit more about what you make of the president's defiant tone here and those strong words we heard from him, where he was saying he was not getting out of this race.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the sort of energy I think that many in the campaign have been saying President Biden can muster and display for people. We saw him obviously energetic, fist pumping at one point there as he talked about when you get knocked down, you get back up. I thought it was also notable that he said very clearly that, as Mike noted, he is the nominee because people voted for him in the primaries. And then he made reference to people trying to push him out. We've heard a handful of people by name who have called for President Biden to drop out of the race, and some others who've sort of on background and without giving their names have said they'd like to see that too. I want you to hear a little bit of what the president had to say in response to those people who are trying to push him out, as he said.
But ever since then, there's been a lot of speculation. What's Joe going to do? Is he going to stay in the race? Is he going to drop out? What's he going to do? Well, here's my answer. I am running and going to win again. Well, guess what? They're trying to push me out of the race. Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I'm staying in the race. I'll beat Donald Trump.
And in every conversation that I've had with members of the Biden-Harris campaign staff, they echo that sentiment, that he is staying in the race, that the fundraising has continued, and there's been some strength there. And so we can expect to see him roll on, Yamiche.
Yeah, my sources have been saying the same thing. Now, Doug, you're a presidential historian. Put this into context, and was this really the step in the right direction for President Biden here? Doug?
Yeah, this has been day 8 since the debacle of his debate performance, and every day he needs to do things to rehabilitate his stature, not only within the Democratic Party, but within the Republic in general. He comes out slow on these things. I mean, he was trying to tell, I think, to say, look, I make mistakes, but on July 4th, back in 2019, Donald Trump, talked about airplanes in 1776 that didn't exist. That's a true story. It was a great goof or teleprompter, bad moment for Trump back then. But he mentioned Gaylord Nelson out of the gate, a former long ago Wisconsin senator. What about name dropping the people running for office for congressional races and the like in Wisconsin right now? But it was an important state to go to. Hillary Clinton, when she lost to Trump, never went to Wisconsin. He's there. He's pretty much tied in the polls. And I think his voice starts growing at the end and he gets into his basic stump speech. And it reminds us that there's still gas in his tank. Don't count him out. And he raises his voice to show his determined stature. So it's a step in the right direction. And now Stephanopoulos to come, and they'll have to be all the way through the NATO meetings next week, these moments to reassure people that the president is still got the energy he needs.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.